Excellent. So I might kick off and run through, yeah, more people should arrive along the way. So welcome to getting business planning done to a very high standard. My name is Tristan. I am a digital solutions advisor at Business Station. So I might just share with you my screen just so I can show you some stuff. So this is a pretty interesting topic because there's a lot of talk about business planning and it's a very kind of popular concept. But obviously there are different levels to which we can actually get this work done. And, you know, particularly if you're bringing to market new products or services or any kind of innovation, a considerable amount of planning needs to be done. And you constantly need to kind of update your plans as the reality of the world kind of reveals itself to you. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move along. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with the traditional approach, which is like the 80-page business plan that you write, and it helps you actually figure out what you need to be doing and how you need to be doing it and all that kind of thing. And this can work for some kinds of businesses, like the more traditional businesses. But even them, I guess, because, you know, certain markets shift and, yeah, market dynamics can shift very quickly. You know, potentially these kind of tools are not agile enough, given the fact that a lot of business is now done and is now affected by the digital world, digital marketing, all that kind of thing. So how I describe them is reasonably comprehensive and useful, but not all encompassing, not very agile, and sort of presupposes that planning precedes execution. And once we've run a business plan, there's potential for it to sit on the shelf, which is not a great situation because, you know, there's no kind of static solution to planning. It continually needs to be updated in response to execution and discovery of what, how the world really works in the kind of space that you're operating in. Anyway, so moving along, just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into why it doesn't work that well anymore. So yeah, it's actually becoming quite difficult to run, you know, traditional businesses, particularly as, you know, the traditional offline marketing channels start to break and are replaced by new marketing channels, kind of threaten the survival of all sorts of businesses, including, you know, particularly, you know, products and services like furniture. I remember trying to navigate that transition between an offline store, how it's all operated in the past, to now like an e-commerce store. And it's actually not that easy because, you know, you have some domain expertise, but then you have to learn how all these other channels work. Also, the 80-pager is a little bit cumbersome to review. And if you have a major kind of pivot or micro pivot, then updating all the documentation isn't potentially that easy and isn't potentially that valuable. So it's a really tricky one. It's also the case that, you know, business conditions are changing so quickly at the moment, particularly with COVID and geopolitical challenges that we see in the Northern Hemisphere. And, you know, commodity prices changing very rapidly. And on top of that, you know, preferred channels change. So businesses are killed because they can't shift to the next generation of marketing channel or sales channel. And also business models have to change as well. The winning business model, the winning solution can obviously change. They're also not very concise, so they don't get to the brass tacks very quickly. And they don't kind of elevate the most important parts of the business model. So it's all kind of there. It's all kind of spread throughout this 80-page document, but everything is given kind of equal credence, which is a bit of an issue if you think about it. So yeah, and it's also the case that you can't easily see how everything is interrelated. Just excellent. So yeah, so continuing on, let's take a look at what affects the planning process. So yeah, if you've just come up with a new idea for a new app or something, typically you're right at the very beginning of the planning cycle. And you're sort of like, yeah, very, very early. Whereas if you've actually been in industry for like 10 or 15 years, and then you come up with an idea, which is based on like a huge amount of market intel and knowledge, you're significantly further along, particularly if the business model that you're pursuing is recognizable, like you've operated it in the past successfully, say within the context of a large corporate, and then now you're spitting it out. That means that you've actually progressed a long way forward. Yeah, so, but if you're coming up with a new business model, one that you're not familiar with, so say that you're a consultant and now you're doing SaaS and you're doing subscriptions, which seems to be everyone's favorite right now, then yeah, you've got to learn. There's a huge learning curve involved in transitioning from one business model to a different one, right? And just because you understand, you know, broadly speaking, what your business model needs to be, doesn't necessarily mean you know how to implement it properly. And then comes the question of model fit, like how close are you to actually cracking the Rubik's Cube of getting the business model that underlies the entirety of your business solved? That's not that easy. It also depends on your sophistication and your greater team sophistication. So that's quite an important factor. So yeah, and also, I mean, you can't necessarily look at every aspect at once, right? So it's very difficult to go and write the 80-page all-encompassing business plan and kind of dig into the details on absolutely everything all concurrently. So typically what I go through all my documents and almost cyclical, and just gradually, you know, make updates as I discover a little bit more about who my customer persona is, who my partners are, you know, key partners, you know, what my value propositions are to them, like how everything maps together. Of course, that can be done within the context of a business model canvas. But then you can actually drill down into all of these aspects and, you know, dig a lot deeper and ask some questions that really aren't asked at that high level by the business model canvas. So effectively, to try to help founders make you know, a bit of a step change in their understanding of what's important with startup, I created a productized service called the 360 Diagnostic Review. At the time, the idea was to try to get as much documentation sent as possible so I could go through it with a fine-tooth comb and actually review what they've done and try to comment and have suggestions, comments, thoughts, insights, all that kind of stuff. So pretty much so that people could benefit from all the insights that I've got through my more than 10 years of startup experience. So yeah, founders would submit documentation that they happen to have created, and it's interesting to kind of see what documents they actually focus on as well, which ones they've included, which ones they've excluded or overlooked. But I did explicitly ask them not to create any new documents if anything's missing, in the case that, you know, effectively we need to know you know, how they kind of overlook that particular facet, and then maybe give them some content to make them a little bit more aware of these items that they've overlooked. And but yeah, this is a pretty heavy duty kind of review. And what I now do is I kind of apply this, but I apply it to ventures that are kind of really stuck and they need a lot of feedback, because it is really quite heavy hitting if you get hundreds of pages of notes kind of on your various plans and models and all that kind of thing. And it can be hard to process all that feedback all at the one time. And so rather than doing that, what I've done is, well, firstly, let me share with you the experience that I gained from doing all these 360 startup diagnostic reviews. So the first thing is that everyone seems to have a different set of documentation. So there's no kind of standardization around documentation. Not to say that there necessarily should be, because it's very hard even to get a high quality template, let alone all the right templates to be applied. And so, yeah, typically what happens is that people download these templates from online sources or government websites, and then they start filling them in. And they get a certain amount of value out of those, but just on the basis of those themselves being frameworks, you're sort of in the situation that your thinking is molded by those templates. What it allows, when you do a 360 diagnostic review, you also start to see how the founders and business owners think and kind of relate the different facets of their business. So everyone's got like a little, mental model of how everything maps together, how, business development relates to sales, relates to various other functions, product and value proposition and that kind of thing. It's fascinating to see this actually, because everyone, and sometimes you actually learn some new things, right? Because in a certain respect, they might have some really good kind of insights that they've kind of unfurled through the process of putting together this planning documentation. So the plan really is to mark up the documentation with a whole range of insights and just offhanded comments about, it could even be about the kind of questions that they're asking at this stage of their process, which is quite fascinating. And, whether that would be the set of questions that I would be asking at this stage. So it is a value-adding process, and it makes some founders a little bit more self-aware of, what is, what elements they're are on track, and what elements perhaps they've either overlooked or perhaps misinterpreted based on someone with potentially more experience perspective. But again, it is a perspective. Like, it's not we're not trying to come in here with the claim absolute truth on everything, because the world is a complicated place, and all we can do is work together to try to figure out as a team how to solve these puzzles. But that's effectively what the 360 diagnostic review is doing. It's allowing, it's creating a platform of collaboration so that people can submit something to someone, and for that someone to try to make sense of what they're doing, but also try to point out biases and gaps in their thinking, because it is a minefield, and we will talk about the various biases that kind of enter into the planning process, if even if you know about them, like confirmation bias and preference bias and all the egocentric bias. Yeah, there's a whole range, and they do act against us even if we know that they exist. How terrible is that? It's not a great thing. But anyway, let's work through it. And another comment is, the longer the venture has been going, the bigger the documentation trail. and the yeah, effectively the more there is to review, and potentially the more errors, like kind of logical errors, can build up. So you end up with the potential to actually see a few really misaligned elements, I would say, over the course of many years, which, yeah, is difficult. And that's why you need multiple people involved, as opposed to just, you know, a solopreneur or even a small team, because once the small team gets too close to the project, then it's very difficult for them to be objective about things. Some more experience that I'll share with you on the planning input. Often, so we are allocated 3 hours that we can go and review and unpack these ventures and provide some feedback. But that's often not enough to really get to understand the way that the founder really thinks. And it's also important to talk to the founder, because they'll tell you what they think as well. And they'll tell you what part hurts, and they'll also, yeah, give you some focus about where they want to kind of take things. And all of this context really does help when you're assessing it. One of the mistakes that I made is kind of doing a review of this kind of in isolation of the founding team. And so it was very difficult to kind of, you know, ensure that value was being created, because, you know, you need to keep the founding team on the same page. Otherwise, even if it's the most amazing document with the most amazing insights, if you don't understand the founding team, then you're missing a lot of of the context, really. So, you know, from running these 360s, it does result in a level of progress, but yeah, there's no kind of static or final solution that can be arrived at, which is a little bit unfortunate. But that's okay. It is what it is. It's still progress in the right direction. However, you know, just because I understand all the comments and the implications of all the comments doesn't necessarily mean to say that the founding team will fully understand those comments. And also, what can happen is that, you know, we straighten things out, but as soon as there's a corner, you know, because perhaps the founder doesn't understand the situation to the level at which the reviewers do, there's the potential, obviously, to drive back off the cliff. And so we need a better model for how to accelerate ventures, other than just doing like a documentation review and a quick 3 hours of contacts, right? Because otherwise, you know, you're not going to get, and I think it was provided by one of our clients, actually, like, no, you know, if you just do 3 hours, 3 quick hours, then you're going to get potentially, well, you set yourself up for potentially not getting long-term meaningful impact, because it's just too short. You know, there's only so many facets of business that you can cover in that short time. And if it's simple, like, oh, just fix a little thing like sales copy or something like that on your website, then, well, that's that can be done in that kind of time frame. But if you're looking to actually overhaul and improve the entire system, then that's, you know, that's much more difficult, particularly within that time frame. But even sales copy, that's obviously interrelated to a whole range of other things. And these interdependencies mean that you change one thing, then you've got to change a whole range of other things that are related to it. So on top of providing like the strategic input, if you've come to my LinkedIn page, you'll notice that I've also added a few extra key items. One is entrepreneurial capacity building, and the other one is small business, startup and small business software tools. And so, yeah, just offering strategy by itself doesn't really correct the situation and result in long-term benefit. Whereas if we actually build up the founders and they accelerate their growth process, their growth journey as founders, then obviously they're going to be more likely to succeed in the future. So these things are interrelated, but they're also different. One's taking, well, kind of like an abstract approach, which is related to actually what the plans and the strategies and the tactics are. And the other one is taking a human-centric approach. How can we build someone that has the capability of launching a startup and has the adaptability within their systems to make this actually work and achieve the holy grail of product, market, channel, model fit. So yeah, it's an exciting challenge actually. And in a certain respect, by working within this program, Digital Solutions, what we've been able to do is actually work on the enabling infrastructure for small businesses and startups to have a better chance of success. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And it's tough, it really is, but it's definitely a worthwhile initiative. So instead of the 360 diagnostic review, what I've kind of opted for or vied for is to create the All Access Accelerator for capacity building. So the All Access Accelerator consists of the one-on-one sessions, which are useful, but after 3 hours, doesn't matter who you talk to, it's very difficult to add a disproportionate amount of value. Even if you took their business model and then pivoted them and showed them kind of what the real business model would look like based on real world conditions, you're only going to improve them by an incremental amount, because then they need to actually be able to execute on that. So the great thing about Digital Solutions is that you get 3 1-hour one-on-one sessions to review exactly where you're up to on a personalized level. But then you get infinite workshops, infinite webinars. And what these do is allow us to kind of extend that conveyor belt and actually do a lot, go to work on a lot more facets of business, right? And so each week I will do 1 or 2 different workshops. So this week I've done 2, and they do look at very different facets of getting these business models off the ground and working. And so the kind of flow that we're trying to adopt is first do the learning and then update the plan. So say that you learn about business model canvases and you haven't even thought about doing one before because you didn't know what a business model canvas is. Then perhaps after this session, you'll go away and you'll do it. And then you'll notice during that process that some of your plans don't actually align properly with your, your overall go-to-market strategy or your channels or whatever it is. So you make some incremental improvement, and then perhaps you'll go to an advisor, have that reviewed, and they'll actually point out a few other holes in your planning, and then the execution piece happens, and it happens all at the same time, all concurrently. And so what we're trying to get to with this is like an assembly line for business model refinement. So that's one element. You've got the kind of the abstract, how everything fits together, how everything maps, and the entrepreneurial growth that comes with that. So those things are intimately interrelated. So cognitive biases at play during the planning process. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So the mind is a bit of a minefield. It really is. And so, there are hundreds of cognitive biases that have actually been identified. And there's actually a really interesting podcast called You Are Not So Smart, which goes into all of these cognitive biases. But some of the ones that have come up in the recent past include preference bias, confirmation bias, sunk cost bias, resource readiness bias, egocentric bias, attentional bias, survivorship bias, selection bias, effort justification, expectation bias, blind spot, and overconfidence effect. Whew, holy moly, look at that. There's huge amounts. So let's just choose a few to go through. I mean, preference bias is where you think what's true aligns with how you want the world to be. So you want the world to really need and want your widget, and therefore that's what you think. You think that because you want it, then it's true, which is not necessarily the case. Confirmation bias is where you run an experiment and have an expectation of what the result is. And even if, you know, it turns out that the experiment yields the opposite result, you're still going to go, well, somehow read into it and see your existing preconceived ideas somehow in there. Sunk cost bias is really typical, where, you know, a founder will go on for years and years and years and they haven't pivoted, and they've just sunk a huge amount of cash and time into a particular approach, and really not made a lot of progress as a result, because they haven't pivoted, they haven't undergone a micro pivot or anything. And then something like a survivorship bias is a bias, which is like, oh, you know, Airbnb succeeded, or Amazon succeeded, so I can do the same, or that's how the world works, because and that's what to expect from a startup, you know, because you know, Amazon is now almost $1 trillion company. That means that anyone can do that, you know. Jeff Bezos is just another guy, you know. So yeah, it's very easy to get caught in these traps. Anyway, so that's one of the benefits of really undertaking kind of like an acceleration review, is to try to flush out some of these biases that creep into our thinking. So what are the kind of documents that I request as part of this review, or as part of, you know, this acceleration engagement? So effectively, yeah, that's what I'm offering, is acceleration services. So the most fundamental building blocks that I like to look at from the outset include items like the business model. So if you do your canvas and you submit it to me, then I will go through with a fine-tooth comb and actually comment it up, and make sure that you've interpreted how to fill it in properly, and make sure that all the pieces match and map together. And that's actually a pretty rare skill, to be able to do that. Anyone can look at a canvas, anyone can fill a canvas in, anyone can comment, like armchair comment on what might be you know, meaningful feedback or not. But you know, the more canvases you look at, the more execution experience that you get, the more value you can add to someone's business model canvas. I also like to try to understand who's on the team, look at their CVs. Often there's a lot of people that have very little experience in startup involved in these kind of ventures. And I also like to see how they've kind of fulfilled the various functions in the org chart. So yeah, that's really how it works. Well, that's really what I'm typically asking for. I also like to try to dig into the mind of the founder with respect to how well that they understand their customer and their partner, if they've got like a partnership model going, which is often the case, particularly in B2B or B2B2B or B2C, B2B2C kind of models, right? So these are like business to business, business to business to business, which is going through a channel, or business to consumer. And so my model personally is a B2B2C, which is business to business, or business to business station to startup founder. Now, startup founder I model as a consumer, not as a company. And you might think, whoa, that's crazy, right? It's a company, but it's not really, because it could be pre-revenue, or it's pre-commercial, right? So it's not delivering the kind of financial results that would allow it to have the budget of a fully commercialized business. Yeah, I also look at investor collaborator and sales decks, just to make sure that I understand the idea really clearly. And if I can't, through the sales decks or the collaborator decks or the investor decks, then obviously they receive a lot of markups. I also sometimes like to look at the competitive and collaborative analysis, like who's doing similar stuff in the space, just to get a sense of like how mature the market is. Are we in an early market, or are we in a growth market, or are we in a market that's kind of established and just holding its own? I also like to ask the founders about what kind of experimentations they're actually running, or whether they're consciously running experiments, or whether they're just, I don't know, just kind of operating ad hoc from day to day, which can be the case as well. Alrighty, so documentation requested. So the business-related documentation. So often I like to see whether founders have kind of realized that they need to start to map out a lot of these other things, like their sales funnel. Maybe they want to look at their value proposition canvas. Then the business plan kind of fits under here. It's like more of a nice to have than a need to have, right? Because in a certain respect, until you've resolved the business model canvas, it's kind of difficult to move past that point. Obviously, with the business model canvas, you're still not, even if you're like some sort of savant, you're not going to be able to necessarily kind of crack the code with your eyes closed. So you're going to need to obviously do quite a bit of networking and validating and all that kind of stuff to understand, and actually validate the different entries within the business model, which we'll take a look at a business model soon, just so that people can get just in case you haven't seen one before and you need to know what it looks like and kind of how it operates, that kind of thing. Then there's the problem solution definition. And so notice that that's not actually part of the business model canvas, strangely enough. That's more of a lean canvas kind of thing, which the lean canvas does have value still, but it's not the core document, because it's more of a that's kind of looking through the lens of product as opposed to through the lens of business, which is obviously a dangerous kind of approach, because it forgets the mechanics that sit behind actually making the venture work and the product work, if you're going to have a product-led business. Okay, our high-level concept. Sometimes I'll look at that. Website and website copy, just to see, because sometimes it's quite obvious from reading websites and website copy that people create websites where they assume that their audience have a lot more of an understanding of their space than they actually do. So you become this expert. It's like the curse of knowledge kind of issue. And sometimes they actually draw attention to details that are not actually that relevant or that kind of salient to their customer. So sometimes there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can just take a look at these documents, notice kind of patterns of challenges and issues, and catch them as early as possible, so that the founders can kind of course correct. Sometimes, you're going to have a list of assumptions, but often the best thing to do is just take a huge amount of action. And so, launch a webinar, launch a workshop, see if people are coming to it, see if they're not, why are they not, why are they, what are they doing, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's because over the course of time, the assumptions kind of almost answer themselves just through sheer volume of action, or sheer amount of action. Segmentation plan is another one that you can look at. Like, once you know your target audience, would you be able to kind of segment them down further? Like, how far could that possibly go? And then scaling plan, that's obviously a really interesting one to look at. Like, how you're actually going to, ensure you've got product market channel model fit, and then how are you going to scale those channels? So it's pretty heavy stuff. Just moving along. So understanding, obviously you need to understand your partners and your customers really well. You'll create an empathy map. Sometimes I ask for a list of partnerships already in place and try to get an understanding of, the status of all of these and whether money is exchanging hands, or, how, founders are maturing relationships. Then, sometimes I ask them to provide me access to their customer relationship management system. And often what I find in the early days, they won't have too much understanding about what kind of questions to ask to actually validate where someone's up to in their kind of buying journey. And they'll be making a whole range of assumptions. Like, I once reviewed one CRM, and they were putting budgets down. And I was asking, where did you get that number from? And they were like, I don't know, just like estimating roughly where they think, the amount, that kind of willingness to pay for a particular product or service would be. And that's kind of a dangerous situation to be in. It would be better to actually kind of have those conversations earlier and see whether you're on the right track or not, before kind of making assumptions and kind of setting yourself up for some nasty surprises as you try to close. But a lot of this comes from experience and knowing not to get too excited too soon, knowing how to kind of filter through the options properly and effectively. Alrighty, so that's the customer side. Then sometimes what I do, and I offer founders, is to actually do a markup of their either the questions that they ask as a component of their consumer research, or take a look at the results that they've actually received. But often, it's very easy to put together, a consumer research questionnaire, but asking the right questions and asking enough questions and, setting up the consumer research piece properly is not always that easy. And if you get the experimental design wrong, then obviously that's going to lead to a low quality result. Product concept testing is another thing. Sometimes you've got videos of people interacting with your product and asking questions and vocalizing their thought process. That's obviously really interesting to see how they've kind of set that up. And I mean, there are books about all of the, running high quality consumer research and product concept testing, but it does seem that there's a huge amount of variance between how one founder does it and the next, and often to do with which book they've happened to, read and try to apply to their particular startup scenario. And then there's also market research. Often what I'm finding is that people are doing a small amount of market research or a lot of research outside of their area of, domain expertise, and then kind of interpolating a lot of results. So yeah, I would say it's very difficult to kind of have success outside of your domain, because you just don't understand how the market works. You just haven't put the 1,000 hours or the tens of thousands of hours required to actually understand systemically how that market functions. And, you know, doing 10 or 20 hours of market research is not going to make up for that fact. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are. It's almost like a lack of experience creeps in and leaves you a little bit exposed. So sometimes as well, I'll take a look at capital raising documentation. I haven't really looked at ESIC yet. I used to look at the SEIS documentation, which kind of prepares things. So obviously it's early stage investment. I can't remember what the C is. Yeah, you need that documentation in place in order to offer like a discount to investors. Yeah, at the moment it's only about 20%. In other countries it's more like 50%. So hopefully that's going to change over the course of time, so that you know, the government co-invests effectively with you know, with investors coming on board, whether they be you know, people that you know, or actually semi-professional or professional investors. Other documentation to look at is like the one-page investment overview, just to try to understand, you know, what you're actually offering as an investment proposition. And then pitch decks, either speak to versions or email versions. So email version is obviously needing to be more kind of all-encompassing and kind of self-explanatory, so that when you open an attachment and it's your investor deck, then you can actually unpack and start to put together and understand the pitch in its totality. Whereas a speak to deck, obviously you can speak to it and you can fill in any blanks in understanding as you go. And it's just more of a reference guide to prompt you to talk about certain things. Capital planning and financial modeling. This is a really tricky one for early stage because it's very difficult to know the financial mechanics of your business model until you've started to operate it. You've got through potentially you've got your first commercial sale, and then you've gone on to start to scale up a little bit and get your early revenue growth happening. And that's when you can start to get an idea about what kind of level of revenue that you can generate from certain key activities related to operating your business model. It's also interesting to ask the question of founders, like, how do you intend to invest future capital raised? You know, often they'll have like a pie chart, which will have predominantly product development, a little bit of marketing, and then not much else. Maybe it'll have like 5% for consultants or something like that. So yeah, it can be quite worrying. Like any of these elements that you put in your investor pitch deck can be a cause for concern to investors if they have got a lot more experience in actually how this thing should be run versus your understanding of how it should be run. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important, if you've got the opportunity to get a review of your investor deck, what we call an investor pitch deck teardown, and that gives you it can kind of reveal what does and doesn't make sense, and what to expect potential investors to ask questions about, and where the strengths and the weaknesses of your pitch are, that kind of thing. So that's I guess that's more of what Simon Horn from Angel Loop would do. He would be really good at that. And sometimes they put together angel investment panels that kind of dig into your pitch and make sure that it actually stacks up, or ask clarifying questions before you're actually put in front of real life angel investors. And then this one should say product documentation. So you've got your product maps, your MVP maps, your road maps. If you're wanting to do multiple releases, wireframes, and design and development costing. So trying to get as much of a granular understanding about what's happening in the world of product. So yeah, there's a lot to look at. So yeah, I've just included some links to some high quality templates for some of the key documentation. What I found is that a lot of it is actually within Miro. So Miro is just like, I'll just show you what Miro is so that you're aware. I'll just turn this mouse back on. Yeah, it's like a design software that has a lot of cool templates. So yeah, you can just, sign up and pretty much access this template, and then you get 2 or 3 templates for free. And then you can start to use the tool if you so wish. But there's also, they don't just label the different boxes, they also include the various, they provide some explanation about what these squares mean, because they do need a little bit of kind of context to properly understand what's going on. So yeah, so this one has the key partner square is typically the most important in a business model canvas. And the question is like, so who are your key partners to get competitive advantage? So that gives you a little bit more to work with than just going key partners. That could mean a whole range of different things, right? So yeah, that's so continuing on, I just thought I'd do a section on how to make it a little bit more easy. So yeah, because business planning is an ongoing process. There's no static solution. It can be extremely complicated and convoluted and confusing. But what I would recommend is, like, for a lot of founders, is just to go back to the most fundamental documents, which is like the business model canvas. Get that filled out, and then take it to the most kind of experienced person that you know. Be that a digital solutions advisor, or a business coach or mentor, or someone like that can really take a really detailed look at it and strip it, analyze it in a lot of different detail. Yeah, so once they've commented it up, made sure that you at least raise it to the standard that, to their standard, to their level of understanding. Then you're at a point, I guess you're at a starting point that the business model canvas is starting to make sense at a high level, right? Then once that happens, that's when you start to drill into the details, like those squares in a little bit more detail, and use some of the more exotic planning tools to unpack various aspects of what you're doing. And this will just be an ongoing process until you hit a high level of fit. And then the higher the level of fit, obviously the more growth that will result. And then, yeah, continuing on, then there's this concept of launching a low fidelity business with the aim of achieving kind of like an interim, like an interstitial step, which is called the minimum viable business. That's like a business that can run and make a small amount of profit at a small scale, right, with minimum viable processes. In the E-Myth, which is a book on how to work on your business, not just in your business, right, they refer to this as the franchise prototype, like creating a very small, almost miniature version of your business, which operates in accordance, with the processes that you've laid out, and predictably generates a known amount of revenue and profitability. So yeah, and then look at your small, your minimum viable business, and actually identify what the shortcomings or problems are that exist within that model. So try to analyze what's working and also take a look at what's not working as well. And then that should give you a really clear sense of how to improve this broken machine, right? So that's effectively what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure that all of the elements are in place, and then they all connect up and they operate efficiently. And then you go all the way back to the first step and repeat. So once you've made some improvements, then that will be reflected in a revised version of your business model canvas until you achieve, what would be called MVP or MVB2. So notice how I'm not using the terminology MVP, minimum viable product or minimum viable process. I'm referring to minimum viable business because that's a better way of approaching it. It's a much more all-encompassing way of approaching it. So concluding thoughts, business planning can be very multidimensional. Yes, it can. It's crazy. And it's important not to take a product-centric approach. It's much better to center yourself on achieving a business model that works first, and then, the value proposition square. That's really where product lives. And be prepared for dozens of iterations. If it's a new product or service, you need to achieve a level of fit, which is known as product, market, channel model fit. And in that respect, it's very multidimensional, and it requires a lot of fiddling around with different variables until you achieve kind of like a royal flush or resolving that Rubik's cube. Advisors can potentially shortcut your progress, although not all feedback is equal, and people with a lot more experience will be able to add a lot more value than someone that has just a perspective on things that may or may not be that useful. And there's no such thing as perfect planning. So I think that there was a presentation actually not so long ago, which is like how to achieve perfect planning. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. Only, I guess, if something is super predictable can you plan for it to happen. But if not, then you're kind of at the whim of the universe in many regards. And I think people underestimate how sophisticated and complex reality actually is. So that is that. So if you'd like to revisit your business model canvas or do one for the first time, here's the link to the business model canvas using Miro. What I recommend is that you send it to businessstation.com.au. You book a session to see myself or someone like me. Jared's another one that can take a really good look at business model canvases. He's across in Bundaberg. So yeah, off with the bear. And I can look at, because I've looked at so many over the years, I can review it in real time and provide instantaneous feedback of whether it kind of stacks up and makes sense, or what kind of questions I'd be asking at this stage in order to verify that we are cooking with gas, and there's actually something here that we can turn into a working project or working business. And then once you've received the feedback, then you iterate your model. And we might be able to do this a couple of times. So the outcomes of this work together are getting to a tighter level of product market channel model fit, or at least understanding that we're not there, and why we're not there and how we're not there. And another potential is to increase your revenue growth maturity by identifying higher value customers or channels that work more efficiently in order to reach these customers. So that's pretty much it. And let's iterate together. until we get to a point of actually solving that business model canvas and actually progressing through the planning process further. So if you'd like to work with me on your startup or business, then you can access my services through the Digital Solutions program. So you get, for $40 plus GST, you get 3 hours one-on-one, and then you get an infinite supply of group sessions with people like myself. And yeah, we pretty much go through topics like this and other really fascinating topics relating to scaling, like product channel fit. We go through scaling marketing channels and a whole variety of different kinds of considerations that often are overlooked when you go and just talk to a marketing advisor, or someone that works with websites and all that kind of thing, which is kind of the bread and butter of digital solutions. So this adds an extra layer to the kind of support that we can provide, which is almost like analyzing all the connective tissue between the various elements of your model and your operations. Cool. So yeah, those are my details. Thanks for your attendance. Thanks for your attention. Hopefully you got quite a bit out of that. If there are any questions, don't hesitate to email me. We don't have time for questions because it's 10:59 exactly. I'm sure you've probably heard enough by this stage. Yeah, and feel free to reach out if you just want to chat and see whether we can kind of work together and help you get to that next step, get to that next stage, and progress along your startup or small business journey. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, and have a great weekend, and hope to speak to you guys quite soon. Okay, bye for now. See ya.